Being Well and Serving Well. In this series, Be Well Read, I partner with Story and Song Bookstore Bistro in Fernandina Beach on Amelia Island, and I share books from their shelves, but from my life. Books that have impacted my life professionally and personally, impacted my wellness journey and my wholeness journey. These are books I believe will impact you as well if you choose to read them, and I hope you do. I think that they will help you heal in ways you might not know that you need to heal. And I'm one who believes that each day, each of us needs to heal in some way. Today, I have a good dose of healing hope for all of us. Hope is the bird that feels the light and sings even when the dawn is still dark. These are the words of Rabindranath Tagore, a Bengali polymath who was a poet and philosopher, a painter and a composer in the late 19th century and early 20th century. Somehow I think he must have read the works of Kelly Turner, though of course that's not possible. As I said last time in introducing the book by Dr. Turner and her first book, Radical Remission, if I could only recommend that you read one book, that is the book I would recommend, Radical Remission. But I'm super excited that I can recommend more, and so I have another book today by Dr. Turner. The work of Dr. Turner, her thorough research, her heartfelt storytelling, and her passionate desire that her readers find hope in the radical healing that others have experienced. These elements give me hope, and I'm like that bird, feeling the light and singing even when the dawn might seem still dark. Now, it was a joy to hear from one of you who listened in last time as I introduced Radical Remission and chose to begin reading that book. One of you reached out and said this, Deborah, this book should be required reading for every American. You got to know I agree with that. And today, another book by Dr. Kelly Turner, Radical Hope. Radical Hope. First, a few reminders about Dr. Turner and her passion for integrative oncology. Dr. Turner is a New York Times best-selling author of the first book, Radical Remission, and now in 2020, brand new book she's just published, Radical Hope, which we're going to explore today. It's co-authored this time with Tracy White, and we'll learn a little bit more about Tracy in a few minutes too. Now, as I mentioned last time, Dr. Turner's work is a result of research, traveling to over 10 countries and analyzing over 1,500 cases of what she calls radical remissions. We're going to unpack that phrase in a few minutes too. But I want to introduce you to another part of Dr. Turner's work, the Radical Remission Project. This is something you can check out for yourselves at radicalremission.com, where she offers courses, workshops, and a database, a free database of healing stories of patients and their loved ones. If you're a cancer patient who has survived cancer or another disease against all odds, I invite you, Dr. Turner invites you, her team invites you, go to this website, radicalremission.com, and share your healing story. It will inspire others. And then if you're one who has recently been diagnosed or is walking through a cancer journey yourself, go to the site, plug in the search engine, the type of cancer you've been diagnosed with, and you will find story after story, healing hope, stories of other patients who've experienced exactly your diagnosis and then their own radical remissions. Talk about hope. The database is extensive and the information is often personal, but it's always powerful. And you can certainly go there and research for a friend or a family member. Now, in her undergraduate work, Dr. Turner studied at Harvard, studied psychology and screenwriting, of all things, after which she pursued a master's degree in clinical social work with an emphasis in counseling cancer patients. Some of you may recall last time I shared that Dr. Turner found her calling as she spent time volunteering in the pediatric ward at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York City. As she continued talking with cancer patients, the stories they would share began to touch her deeply, and she felt drawn to combine her passion for screenwriting and storytelling with her passion for research. And she wanted to answer this question: how did these people heal? This year, she completed a docuseries based on Radical Remissions and is currently writing a feature film script based on Radical Remission titled Open-Ended Ticket. I love that title, and I look forward to that. I hope you will too. I know we'll be hearing a lot more from Dr. Turner in the years to come, as her voice continues to be one, singing even when the dawn seems dark. Now, in Radical Remission, a couple of weeks ago, we were introduced to 9 key factors. Each of the Radical Remission cases shared in common factors that each one of them included in their healing protocols. Radical factors like radically changing your diet, remember Chris Wark? Or increasing positive emotions. You might remember the story of Sarah Ann Rothberg and her founding of the Comedy Cures Foundation. Also taking control of your health and following your intuition. Now, while further outlining these 9 factors, the new book, Radical Hope, adds a 10th factor, exercise. It's certainly a factor that many, perhaps you, were surprised wasn't included in the initial 9 factors. Now, if you choose to explore these books for yourselves, you'll find that the 9 key factors in the first book and the 10 key factors in the second are presented in no particular order. The order is actually shuffled about in the second book. This is purposeful, emphasizing that Dr. Turner and her team still do not know which of these factors, if any, is most important in bringing about radical remissions, though the authors are very clear that each story they share is of a patient who incorporated all 9 in the first book and then all 10 factors leading to their radical remission. Now, what exactly is a radical remission? You may be asking. Now, the general public is familiar, probably more familiar with the term spontaneous remission. That's the term used in the medical field. And as she introduces Radical Hope, she says this: it became very clear as I interviewed people who had experienced a spontaneous remission that there was nothing spontaneous about it. These survivors spoke of making significant lifestyle and emotional changes in order to heal. Their so-called miracle healings occurred because they made radical shifts in their minds and spirits, not just in their bodies, upending their entire lives in order to achieve what I, she says, came to call radical remissions. One of the reasons these books, both Radical Remission and Radical Hope, have been significant in my own life and work is simply this holistic approach. While it is true that I began our Be Well Read series focusing largely on books that talked about the power of food to heal, I hope you've noticed that we've made a shift. In both books by Dr. Turner, radically changing your diet is one among 10 factors, and each of the other factors lends credence to this holistic approach that I've found to be fully necessary and truly powerful to help people heal. In our compartmentalized society, a monetized society, this is a radical approach. And the word radical, you may recall, comes from radix, meaning root. That which is radical gets to the root of the matter. And radical remissions are no different. Again, reading from the introduction of Radical Hope. What is a radical remission? A radical remission is a statistically unlikely remission in which the person either heals without conventional treatments, first tries conventional treatments which do not lead to a remission, so they then try alternative treatments which do lead to remission, or 3, uses a combination of conventional treatments and complementary treatments at the same time in order to outlive a dire prognosis. And remember, that's a prognosis that's less than 25% 5-year survival rate. Radical hope is dedicated, quote, to anyone who has ever felt fear when what they needed most was hope. If that's you today, or if that is a friend or a loved one, I'm glad you're here. I hope you'll listen with your heart and your head. When a doctor says you have cancer, fear is the first emotion that we feel. A wave of overwhelming fear, as some of you may know all too well. In that moment, what is needed most isn't statistics or next steps or really even prepping for emergency surgery. What is needed is time to exhale. What is needed is time to cry, time to breathe. Time maybe to scream. I'd probably do that. What is needed is time to call the ones who love us most, time to digest the news, time to consider our options, time to summon hope. Fear cannot exist where hope is. Radical hope. This book offers just that, and it includes not only more stories of radical cancer survivors, but also the healing stories of exceptional survivors, the authors call them, of other diseases, including MS, Alzheimer's. This, to me, is the gift of radical hope, expanding the reach of what is possible, encouraging us to believe more, and offering hope in place of fear. So let's begin our discussion of radical hope where the authors begin, with exercise. Here's how Dr. Turner explains her exclusion of exercise as one of the factors in the first book and her inclusion of exercise in the second book, Radical Hope. Exercise did come up as one of the healing factors that survivors used when I first researched Radical Remission, but it was not a factor that all survivors utilized, which is why it was not included in my original dissertation or my first book as one of the most common healing factors. However, I came to believe this is because many of the people that I studied were too weak to exercise at the beginning of their healing journeys. That makes sense. Turner goes on to say that it might help us to reframe exercise. It's physical activity. It's what I call meaningful movement. To me, this evokes less stress, less pressure, and invites more joy. Outlining a variety of exercise protocols, the authors reinforce the latest scientific research. I like that about this book, science-based, which shows that moderate to intense exercise, once a patient is able to move again, is one of the best things cancer patients can do to support their healing. Tremaine, diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer in 2012, provides a great example. Because the tumor that he had was pressing up against his stomach and in his lungs, the doctors feared that any kind of movement would cause the cancer to spread, and so they told him to stop moving. He did as they said. And in hindsight, he calls this a mistake, having always been active, playing soccer, going to the gym several times a week, boogie boarding at the beach, practicing yoga. About a year later, he realized he wasn't going to die, despite diagnosis with that terminal cancer, stage 4 pancreatic cancer. But he was only going to survive and not live if he couldn't begin to move again. And so he did, begin to move. Tremaine utilized another of the healing factors, following your intuition, as he began to move, stepping back into his life, into movement, stepping beyond a terminal cancer diagnosis and finding his own radical remission. Another exceptional survivor that the authors introduce in Radical Hope is Palmer, who used each of the 10 healing factors to heal from a diagnosis in 1984 of relapsing remitting MS, multiple sclerosis. Let me tell you a little bit about MS. MS is a chronic and debilitating disease that affects the central nervous system, including the brain and spinal cord, and predominantly strikes women of childbearing age. MS is considered an autoimmune disease, we're familiar with that, in which your body mistakenly attacks itself because your immune system, which is doing its protective job of destroying invaders like toxins and infections, misfires, crossfires, or overreacts. In the case of MS, the body's immune system mistakenly attacks and damages myelin, the fatty material surrounding our nerve cells. When myelin is damaged and destroyed during an autoimmune attack, patches of nerve cells become exposed and then scarred. This scarring is called sclerosis. With the initial diagnosis at age 19, wow, that's young, Palmer was told there was nothing she could do but, quote, take medication and prepare for life in a wheelchair, end quote. With little confidence that medication would change the prognosis, Palmer chose instead a watch and wait approach. During this time, she began to unwittingly tap into several of the key factors outlined in both Radical books. Her mother, father, and friends provided strong social support. One friend brought her Norm Cousins' book, Anatomy of an Illness. You may recall from our discussion in Radical Remission, Norm is the one who healed his own debilitating, life-threatening disease, ankylosing spondylosis. And he talks about discovering the power of laughter in his book, Anatomy of an Illness. Palmer says she and her parents made it their mission to laugh as much as possible. What fun, even in the midst of disease. Increasing positive emotions, another key factor in radical remissions. Another friend, creating some offense initially, yet leading to a significant breakthrough, asked Palmer why she thought she got MS in the first place. Wow. This question led her to realize she had long suppressed negative emotions. In her words, I'll read, "A big part of my healing journey was releasing stored emotion. At the same time, I worked on practicing forgiveness and feeling more gratitude. So it's both letting out suppressed emotions," she writes, "as well as cultivating the positive. I discovered that you can't supplement your way out of a bad diet, and you can't exercise your way out of emotional trauma. You just need to address it and find peace." And she goes on to say, "It takes detective work and real courage to explore all of this as a mind, body, spirit adventure." I love that she chose the word adventure, explore. While Palmer made this personal decision not to take medications, at the same time, she also refused to give up hope. And she truly began to explore her adventure. She followed her own intuition and began taking control of her own health. And she says this, quote, "We all need to be the CEOs of our own health and wellness," end quote. You can imagine, I said amen when I read that the first time. Now, if you're keeping count, we're up to 5 of the 10 healing factors that Palmer has engaged to help her heal. Strong social support, increasing positive emotions, releasing suppressed emotions, following her intuition, and taking control of her own health. But there's more. Using guidance that she found in that Norm Cousins book, she began taking a few vitamins and herbal supplements, and she began to experiment with changing her diet. That's 6 and 7. Despite being told repeatedly by the doctors that food would make no difference in her symptoms. Her intuition told her otherwise, and she embarked on several years of experimenting with the impact of nutrition on her particular symptoms. Palmer's healing story is fascinating, taking a few more twists and unexpected turns before finding her completely symptom-free, and now working as a certified functional medicine health coach and author of Beat Autoimmune, in which she shares the full details of her decades-long healing journey, a journey that led to radical remission. 2 more points in her own words. Is it going to take hard work and perseverance and courage and all that? Yes. I know that it might sound trite and it might sound virtually impossible to believe when you're in the throes of something that this disease is a gift. But just hold the possibility that this is happening for you rather than to you. It's great. And then the authors conclude their story of Palmer's healing in this way. Over her 35-year journey, Palmer saw half a dozen neurologists at 6 leading institutions. Each new expert confirmed her diagnosis of MS by her symptoms, MRIs, and clinical office visits. Not one of them offered any hope that her condition would improve. Their goal was to slow the progression of her inevitable decline, which they believed would lead to a life in a wheelchair, followed by early death. Wow. Palmer's story is the epitome of radical remission and radical hope. I hope you will take time to read this book and learn exactly how she became fully, completely healed, symptom-free 36 years later, and without the wheelchairs doctors told her was inevitable. I hope you're also beginning to understand why I am passionate about these books and that I encourage you to read this book too. It has the power to change the way we think about healing, about illness and disease, about wellness and wholeness, terminal diagnoses, and best of all, it has the power to offer us and those we love the gift of hope, radical hope. Now, one of the shared goals that Dr. Turner and her co-author Tracy had in writing Radical Hope was to offer not only stories of people who had radical remissions from cancer, but from diseases other than cancer, like Palmer's story. They write, quote, "Ever since Radical Remission was published, we've received emails from people all around the world who said they used the Radical Remission healing factors to cure themselves, but not from cancer. They've gone into remission from MS, like Palmer, Lyme disease, lupus, heart disease, diabetes, and more." Sally's story of healing from Alzheimer's disease is another example of radical remission and radical hope. Today, 5.8 million Americans are living with Alzheimer's disease, plus all the people who love that 5.8 million people. 1/3 of all U.S. citizens older than 65 will die of Alzheimer's or dementia, which means it kills more seniors than both breast cancer and prostate cancer combined. Enter, yet again, fear. Now, I'm a person who wants to live a long, long life, and I mean live. But I know few people today, whether cognitive decline is in their genes or not, who do not fear a long life, in part because they fear Alzheimer's disease. It doesn't have to be this way. Sally felt this fear and would rather die of anything but Alzheimer's disease. She'd watched too many of her family members digress down that road. As a sharp mind with a successful career in geriatric care nursing, medical research, and teaching in the field of gerontology, she knew all too well the initial signs and symptoms that she began to experience. Mixing up her words, having trouble remembering the day of the week, not knowing exactly when to leave to be on time to an appointment, and most frightening of all, near-miss car accidents that would have been her fault had an accident occurred. It was time to admit that what she kept wanting to pass off as just normal signs of aging were far from normal. Because of her own background, her academic background in the medical field, research became Sally's best step forward as she chose to empower her own healing. And her husband joined in the research. It was actually her husband who discovered the treatment protocol known as RECODE, Reversing Cognitive Decline. This program, RECODE, is a result of decades of lab and clinical research in the area of dementia led by Dr. Dale Bredesen. and this work is well respected and well recognized. Dr. Bredesen outlines 3 types of Alzheimer's disease. You may be familiar with these. One associated with inflammation and common viruses, one associated with hormonal and metabolic imbalances, and one associated with enhanced sensitivity to inhalation of biotoxins like mold. This latter one actually jarred Sally's memory to a time when she and her husband moved into a 50-year-old house, a house with mold in the insulation in the basement and carpet padding. Wow. At the time, there was also their close proximity to a busy interstate that caused Sally's eyes to burn each evening from the fumes. We seldom realize the significant impact, the long-term consequences of what may seem to us at the time as inconsequential. Sally's story is a great wake-up call to all of us. It certainly was a wake-up call for her as she recognized the need to step into healing on a variety of levels, making significant lifestyle changes, including sleep, both physical and mental exercise, nutrition, stress reduction, and even dental hygiene. It makes a difference. Stress reduction in the form of meditation became key to her healing. She says this, quote, "As a nurse with a PhD, I really enjoy seeing all the research that supports meditation," unquote. Dr. Turner writes that through Recode, Dr. Bredesen emphasizes meditation and finding joy and relaxation as critical to reducing the brain-damaging stress that can lead to cognitive decline and disease. By utilizing each of the 10 factors to some extent, Sally was able to completely reverse her Alzheimer's disease. Completely reverse her Alzheimer's disease. Wow. One important note, as in Radical Remission, it is important to note that the changes Sally made were not temporary just until those symptoms started to subside. No, the changes she made have become permanent lifestyle changes, and they are lifestyle changes that have been embraced by her husband as well. He says this, "I see a real purpose to Sally's ongoing and continued existence, to her radical remission, and to my work giving her support. How many people over 70 years old get a chance to influence millions of lives," he writes. "I just don't even have the words to say how powerful that is to my life's meaning," end quote. You see, our healing creates healing for others. Perhaps the powerful, unconditional support of Sally's husband, Martin, is why the authors chose to share Sally's story in the chapter on increasing social support. Fear doesn't stand a chance in the presence of love. And this, from the authors, quote, "Sally's story demonstrates that you should never give up hope even when faced with an incurable disease. Dr. Bredesen and many other forward-thinking health practitioners are shifting the health paradigm from a sickness model to a wellness model." That's a shift I applaud. I hope you do too. Another of the 10 factors that are noted in Radical Hope is having strong reasons to live. As I mentioned earlier, Radical Hope is co-authored by Tracy White. In 2016, Tracy was diagnosed with aggressive, recurrent cervical cancer and given just 15 months to live. Her doctors told her, quote, "You will have chemo until you can't, and then you will die," end quote. Talk about exhale. With an 8-year-old son and loving husband to live for, that simply wasn't enough time. 4 years before, Tracy had been diagnosed with stage 1B cervical cancer. As a successful marketing executive, Tracy spent 20 years creating advertising deals and partnerships with well-known entities, Travel and Leisure, Food and Wine, Traditional Home. She spoke, wrote, and taught on the subject of wellness, and she dreamed of writing a book. Having a dream, having a strong reason for living is one of the key factors that contributes to radical remission. Writing this book provided Tracy with a strong reason to live, and it is written not only with the voice of Dr. Turner, but with the voice of one who has walked where these radical survivors have walked. Now, about her reoccurrence, here's a message from Tracy, quote, "Lest you think having a recurrence implies these principles don't work, remember that I'm still alive 2.5 years after my expiration date, the expiration date given to me by my doctors," end quote. And that's 6.5 years after her initial diagnosis. I invite you to read the book in part to learn the rest of Tracy's story. It will pull at your heart. For today, one more story of healing, this time the healing of a baby boy, Jeremiah, diagnosed before the age of 1 with a rare form of skin lymphoma. When Jeremiah was just 5 months old, his mother, Tanya, noticed a lump on his chest that was a little harder and bulkier than the rest of his baby's soft skin. Easy to tell the difference, I'm sure. A biopsy confirmed their fears. Their little baby was very sick with a form of cancer, most often found in 15 to 35-year-olds. The doctors offered little hope, in part because the chemotherapy they had to offer was so strong it could kill a baby. And so they recommended a child leukemia regimen instead. Right from the start, Tanya felt her intuition guiding her away from allowing her baby to undergo such harsh treatments that could lead to vision impairment, permanent immune deficiencies, and possible brain damage if the baby survived the treatments at all. Dr. Turner writes, quote, "In addition to intravenous chemotherapy, the doctors were suggesting approximately 40 spinal taps on Jeremiah in an attempt to directly treat his brain with chemotherapy, even though there was no sign of cancer in his brain, and multiple spinal taps could actually lead to brain damage." Curious. With the strong instincts of a mother, Tanya stepped into her own power on behalf of baby Jeremiah and began to research holistic approaches, including programs and clinics outside of the United States. While many in her circle of family and friends literally called her crazy, her own father was supportive right from the start, and by the time the baby was 8 months old, Jeremiah's father, Tanya's partner Gene, had come on board too, agreeing to treatments other than chemotherapy. Tanya's research eventually led her and Gene to take their little boy to a clinic in Chile for a 45-day protocol. Friends and family finally rallying to the cause, helping raise over $12,000 to fund their travel and the treatments Jeremiah needed to save his life. And they did save his life. Essentially, the clinic focused on giving Jeremiah's body the tools he needed to heal his disease naturally, strengthening the body's defenses in part through a vegan diet, where his little body was fed specific foods in a specific order throughout the day. I found that fascinating. It allowed for optimum digestion even as his little baby system was still growing, and it diminished any negative effects of overworking his tiny baby organs. Sweet. There were also thermal treatments several times a day, warming his body up, cooling it down, in appropriate measure to remove toxins. Right from the start, Tanya questioned God, but she says she never lost faith. And remember, a strong spiritual connection is one of our 10 factors, our key factors to healing for us and clearly for those within our care. Tanya's faith only grew as she came to believe Jeremiah's cancer had a divine purpose. One less child suffering through chemo because of what she chose to do for him. One less child suffering because of the tenacity, the wisdom, the faith, and the courageous intuition of his mother. Now, there's much more to Jeremiah's story. I hope you'll read it. But don't worry, I'm going to cut to the chase and let you know that today, Jeremiah is very much alive. He's a happy, easygoing 10-year-old fourth grader who loves baseball, basketball, drawing, and like many fourth graders, just being a silly little boy. And he is completely cancer-free. Wow. We've all heard too many stories of children dying of cancer. And as I said earlier, it simply doesn't have to be this way. Now you know. Now we know. The question is, what will we do with this knowledge? Will we give our time to reading Radical Remission and Radical Hope before we or someone we love is diagnosed with cancer or MS or Alzheimer's or another disease that we now understand isn't and is far, actually, from incurable? Or will we wait? We often ignore our bodies until they fail us, when they fail us, in large part, because we've ignored them. Why wait? What will we do with this new knowledge? Our answer can literally mean the difference between life and death. I think it's time not only for radical remission and radical hope, but for radical action. Reading and sharing these radical stories of remission, full and complete, surviving cancer and other diseases, once considered incurable, surviving them against all odds. One final word about radical hope. Radical hope isn't false hope. From Dr. Turner, quote, "Giving false hope means making people hopeful about something that is untrue or false. Radical remission cases may be unexplainable at this time, but they are true. These people did cure their cancer and other diseases in statistically unexpected ways," end quote. How could a discussion of these cases that are being ignored, a discussion of what they might teach us about healing potential of our bodies, of our minds and our spirits, how could that discussion be anything but healing, offering healing hope in a world and in a field too often paralyzed by fear? Hope is a bird that feels the light and begins to sing even when the dawn is still dark. I hope you'll join me in being that bird, singing when the dawn is still dark, because we have seen even the slightest glimmer of light. Honestly, I've read these books so many times now that the light is bright. It's bright to my mind and heart. And so I hope you will read them too. Radical remission, radical hope, radical indeed. This month, as you know, we focused our conversation on books related to cancer in part to honor Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Next month, we have a bit of a surprise for you. I'm not going to say much, so stay tuned to the Story and Song newsletter and to both Facebook pages, Story and Song and Be Well, Serve Well. Remember, B is with 2 E's, because in Hebrew, Deborah means worker bee. Be sure to like and follow along as I continue week by week to offer information designed specifically to help you lean into lives where eating becomes spiritual healing practice, where being mindful of all this is our default setting, and where serving others is an organic result of our own very deep healing. As always, special thanks to Connor, who's behind the scenes, bringing me to you from Atlanta to wherever you are as you listen. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you've taken time to tune in. I hope you'll thank yourself. I hope you will thank yourself for the gift of radical hope. It's always good to be together. Let's continue to be well read, to be well and serve well. And I'll see you in early November, November 5th. Thanks, everybody. Bye.